Greetings all and welcome to another edition of the Namazu News. So Yoshi-P has been making the rounds, doing interviews, and of course giving answers, and so here are the highlights of the things that have been said, starting with the inevitable question that had to be answered. Was Yoshi-P shocked by the reception to Dawntrail? To which he responded, not really, which kind of makes sense. Going back into Endwalker when they were promoting Dawntrail, they were trying to make it very clear that we need to temper our expectations, so they expected some level of mixed reception even before the expansion released. That being said, he does go on to talk about the mistakes they made, noting that there is pacing issues and they probably could have moved certain sections of the story into side quest content, that way people that wanted to learn more could have. He also notes the issues that people have with battle content and the fact that people want more to do earlier, to which he notes that going forward they're going to try and address that to make sure that you're able to actually play your job earlier on and you don't have to go through hours upon hours upon hours with just reading and reading and reading and, you know, just something to break up the monotony. Now, the other inevitable thing that Yoshi-P, of course, had to address was the subject of Wook-Lamont, to which he responded that they kind of failed with her character, noting that they wanted to do so much with her in such a short amount of time that it just kind of compounded the already existing pacing issues, and they maybe should have changed certain aspects of her character to help with that. However, Wook-Lamont wasn't the only character to be discussed, as the subject of the Scions also came up, and Yoshi-P notes that, you know, for some time now they've been struggling to answer a question as to what they need to do with these characters going forward, and Dawntrail ended up being where they wanted to test the answer for that question. Do players want more of them? Do players want less of them? But the ultimate answer was players just don't want them used in a half-hearted manner, which Yoshi-P admits happened, and he regrets that it did. But going forward, he talks about how instead of trying to push all these characters into a single expansion, instead they're going to take a step back and focus on smaller groups, giving those characters their time to shine, while the others take a step back until their time comes to star in their own expansion. Now, the MSQ wasn't the only subject of criticism that Yoshi-P was confronted with, as he was also asked about the raids that, though well received, did have one glaring issue in reference to difficulty, as the DPS checks in the fights were almost non-existent. Yoshi-P goes on to explain that this was a result of overbuffing, as Pictomancer ended up being much more powerful than they ever intended, and because they generally don't like to nerf jobs, they instead choose to buff others. They ended up buffing jobs to be in line with Pictomancer, and as a result, the DPS checks in the Savage tier basically just disappeared because of how powerful Pictomancer was, and by bringing the other jobs up to its level, it just ended up being too much. And while they considered going back and maybe adjusting the DPS checks, they ultimately decided against it, as one, it could swing the pendulum in the other direction, and two, it could cause buffs or server issues that would just ruin the experience for everybody, and so they just decided to let players experience it as it was, and fix the issue going forward, which he goes on to ensure that the next tier is going to be much more difficult, noting that the 8 fight in particular is going to be very difficult, and they're testing some new things out in the tier that you should be on the lookout for. Now, the last subject of criticism that Yoshi-P addressed was in reference to Alliance raids, specifically the Endwalker raids, and how the community overall saw them as too easy, and so people want to know if Dawntrail is going to fall into the same issues as Endwalker, to which Yoshi-P responds that they've kind of always had issues when it comes to balancing the difficulty for Alliance raids, because while they don't want them to be too difficult, they also don't want them to be a walk in the park, and so they had to come up with a new standard by which to judge the Alliance raids, to which they decided that going forward they're going to aim to make them difficult enough that on your first run you wipe about 3 times, which I think is a decent enough standard. But with that, let's start moving on to the updates and the new information that we got, starting with the updates. So in the previous edition of the Namazu News, we talked about the 24-man Alliance raid. Well, back then, it was kind of up in the air as to whether that was going to be part of the new boss job or if it was a new piece of content. However, in the recent interviews, it's made more clear that it's going to be a new piece of content, as while talking about the Alliance raid question that we just covered, Yoshi-P then goes on to talk about the 24-man Savage. And the other detail that hints to it being a new piece of content is the fact that it's coming out next patch, which is a shocker. This also lends to it being its own piece of content, as the new boss job we know is coming out in 7.2, while this 24-man Savage is coming out in 7.1. So while it's still possible they're connected, as it might lead into the boss job for the next patch, it is just looking to be its own piece of content based on what this interview says. That also means that the next patch is going to be heavy on high-end content, because we're also getting the ultimate, so if you're a high-end raider, you're definitely going to be looking for that next patch. Let's just hope they don't fall into the criterion problem, and the rewards for doing it are pretty decent. The next update we got was for the 2-die system. Yoshi-P talks about how they haven't yet finished putting all the old assets into the system, but they are working on finishing it and aiming to have all the old assets updated for the new system by patch 7.3, which is a lot sooner than many may have expected, so be on the lookout for new 2-dyed items. And the last of our updates is the raid planner. Remember that thing they showed us off some time ago and we haven't seen anything about? Well, they didn't forget about it. They're just still working on it. So we don't have much information on it other than the fact that they remembered it exists. But with that, let's move on to the actual new information, beginning with something that a lot of people have been waiting for and they have officially confirmed. So in a recent UI panel, we got showed some stats and some small updates that are coming to GPOs, but the biggest thing that got revealed here was a new feature that they are working on, chat bubbles. I know a lot of people are going to be excited for this, that it's coming in the game. However, something important to note is they did say that it's probably going to take some time, as there are a lot of factors they have to keep in mind before they implement it into the game. And so while they're working on it, don't expect it anytime soon. And the last little detail for our news update is 14 might be coming to a Nintendo console. Or it might not. Yoshi-P was asked if they plan on bringing it to the Switch, to which he responded they want to bring it to as many platforms as possible, which isn't ruling out the option, but it's also not confirming. And so with the Switch 2, we might see it come to Nintendo at some point in the future, which is kind of cool, but as for now, it's just a possibility. But that's going to wrap up our news for this time around. I hope you found this useful, and if you did, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and let me know what is the thing that you're most interested about in the recent news. For me, it's going to be these Savage Alliance raids. I'm really interested to see not only how that's going to work, but also what are the rewards going to be, if there are rewards. I hope they don't make that mistake again. But yeah, what's the thing that you're most excited about? And I got a feeling for most people it's just going to be the chat bubbles, but who knows, it might just be the raid planner. With that being said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.